This is the Zelos Helica. And in a nutshell, what Zelos is trying to do here is create a Gada watch with a bit of flair. And in true Zelos fashion, they're kind of coming at this in a totally different way. Like they found a new solution to the Gada problem, or the Gada formula. And that's a big part of what makes this one interesting, as it really doesn't come across like your average Gada watch, but more like a toughened up super cocktail time. Now, I want to warn you right now that I'm going to say the phrase gotta a lot. Go anywhere, do anything, watch. Which is basically a jack of all trades, something you can wear casually, but also looks good enough to wear dressed up, and is tough enough to go swimming or hiking with. Gotta watch. Which is something we saw a lot of last year, and in a lot of ways that phrase is getting overused. I know a lot of you are getting tired of hearing it. Hell, I'm tired of saying it. But in certain situations like this, it's the most effective way to communicate. Because that's what this watch is really all about. That, and I have to put up a disclaimer that, like most Zelos watch reviews, Zelos sent this watch over and they're not asking for it back. In other words, I get to keep it, hence the promotional tag. But let's get back to the whole Gada thing before you guys get bored and skip ahead. Because what Zelos has done to help the Helica stand out is this galoche dial. And instead of the standard technique of stamping it, Zelos has used a CNC machine to etch these in, giving it more definition and depth, resulting in even more light play than you would otherwise get. In fact, this thing is downright crazy looking at times. When the light is focused on it and all these little details come into focus, it's a very intricate dial with flowing lines leading out everywhere to really sharply defined indices. And from looking at the renders, one of the cool things I think is that each colorway is going to have its own different pattern, giving each colorway a really unique feel. Now, this one is the slate gray version, and it's probably the most conservative out of all of them, relatively speaking, where you have a gray dial paired with silver hands and applied indices. There's a black date wheel down at the bottom, but other than the light bending show that comes from the galoche pattern, the only thing that's really going to stand out is the yellow second hand floating over all of it. So it's somewhat conservative compared to the others. And one thing that I really like here is that it's rather clean, relatively speaking, because Zelos didn't put a lot of text on this thing. Even the case back, there's not a lot there. And even though this may be one of the more simpler designed Zelos casebacks, I actually think it's one of their better ones that really goes with the dial. But on that dial, the only thing that's really here other than the helical pattern is the Zelos logo etched in at the top, most likely put there by the same CNC machine. So for the Helica, it's all about this mesmerizing, light-twisting dial, which isn't necessarily what most Gada watches are about, but we'll get to that in a second. Because before we get to that, I need to point out that this dial wasn't exactly easy to capture. I mean, aventurine dials are definitely harder, but the thing is, the way I shoot my watches is I have some studio lights focused in on the dial, eliminating glare so you can see every detail of the dial. But in this case, when you light it up, all those grooves start catching and playing with the light, and it's a lot. I mean, it's gorgeous, it's really well done, but again, it's a lot. But as you can see, it can be overwhelming, and the hands just sort of fade into the background. They're harder to make out, which I will talk about more later on because it's a little bit more of a complex topic. But right now, I'm pointing this out just to say that it's not going to look like this all the time, and especially on your wrist. And that's why I've also got some extra shots here without any extra light, as well as a few shots with some glare on the dial, just to show you what it's really going to look like in different conditions. And as you can see, sometimes it's actually fairly subtle, and especially at a distance. And in those instances, the hands come through fairly easily. So just be aware of that, and again, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But let's get back to what I was saying earlier about how Zelos has found a different solution to the Gada problem. And what I meant by that is that most Gada watches out there follow the same basic formula, which is why most of them look and feel very similar on the wrist. Basically, they're all going to start with a casual yet fairly durable design, and then refine it just a little bit, sharpen it up just enough that it could pass for a dress watch if needed. Now, sometimes they do throw on a more elaborate dial, But most of the time, they just go with something clean and classic. My Chronomaster being a prime example of this. However, Zelos seems to be coming at this from the opposite direction, where they've actually started with a dress watch, then maybe beefed up the specs a little bit, and then toned down the design. Or at least they've toned down the case. As here there are some well-defined brushed sidewalls, very angular short lugs, as well as just a little bit of an omega twisted thing going on with the lugs, and then also a really wide brushed bezel. But they still left a good amount of polish here as well. Not to mention the high double dome sapphire rising out of it. It's just been toughened up to go anywhere status. Which means you have a 39mm case shape, 45.5mm lug to lug, just under 12mm thick, 100 meters of water resistance, and it is powered by Miyota 9015, which kind of puts this watch in that Goldilocks zone. It's not too tall, it's durable enough for most activities, and most people should be able to comfortably wear a watch this size. So in the end, on paper, so to speak, all of the Gada watches out there seem to wind up in the same place. But in practice, since this one is coming at it a little bit differently, it has a different feel. And like I was saying before, rather than a really nice looking sports watch, this one feels a little more like a toughened up cocktail time, which I know is going to be a little bit polarizing. But for me, that's one of the things I like about it. I like that it doesn't look like any of my other go anywhere watches. Most of those have a really similar look and a similar feel, as well as all the other ones I've seen over the years. Really, they just start to blur together a bit. But, at the same time, not having that sports watch look can be a bit of a negative, because that classic clean look is classic for a reason, and a lot of people want that. Not everyone's going to want a toughened up dress watch. Now, another good thing here is the price. When these launch in about a week, they'll have a launch price of $499 US. And if I remember right, that's just a little bit more than what the Erebus Ascent is selling for. And considering some of the extras here and that the dial is probably a little more deeper and well done, that's probably right on target for a good price. LUME here is also fantastic. I mean, it is a Zelos. And I really love the two-tone design, where all the indices and the hour hand are split. And this is one that should last you through the night, as it was able to outlast a Seiko diver. And remember, this isn't a diver. And even though for a Gada watch or a sports watch or even a toughened up dress watch, whatever you want to call this thing, really killer LUME isn't really necessary, I still love the idea of a watch like this so you can still easily read at night. However, it's not always easy to read, so we're going to start talking about my concerns and nitpicks. And that leads us full circle back to the dial when it's just fully in focus. So when you have full direct sunlight or light on this thing, every twist and turn of the dial becomes clear. And while on one hand it is intricately beautiful, as a whole it also becomes very, very busy, to the point that the dial just drowns out the hands and you have a hard time focusing on them just because there's so much else going on. Now, it's kind of hard to say how often this is actually going to happen. It really depends on what you do day to day. But I can tell you that over the last few days when I've been wearing this, I've only had a couple of times where I found it really hard to read. Most of the time, especially when I'm indoors, it's not. It's pretty easy to make out the hands. And especially when there's just a little bit of glare here, as it tones down the galoche effect and the silver hands shine through. But this does lead to a bigger debate and question on if this is okay to have on a Gada watch. Gada watch is supposed to be a watch that's ready for everything, and one where there's some readability issues isn't necessarily ready for everything. It is ready for most things most of the time, but maybe not everything all the time. Which would be okay on a dress watch, but for a true Gada watch, I don't know. So let me know your thoughts on that down below. Now, another concern I have is with the bracelet. For the most part, the bracelet is great here. It is solid link secured with screws, quick release end links, really nice taper, and a great on-the-fly adjustable clasp. Pretty much all the great amenities you want. In fact, I really love that they brought back the clasp from their field watches, where this Z on the back of the clasp, that's actually a button for the on-the-fly adjustment. So it's really cool, really sleek, nicely integrated, and works well. And with a little bit of practice, you can use it while you're still wearing it. But the downside here is that the bracelet does have some sharper edges, which, given the boxy cut of the links, probably isn't that big a surprise. It's not something you're going to feel while you're wearing it, but you are going to feel it every time you pick it up. And let's go back to the end links for a moment, because while they do look like female end links, okay, technically they are female end links, but they're not female end links with full mobility, full range of motion. And most of the time, they just wind up sticking out as far as male end links would. Now, it is perfectly comfortable on my 7¼ inch wrist, especially with the short, fully articulating links and the taper. But it does wind up having a longer effect of lug to lug than the specs would suggest. The bracelet is also a little bit rattly, and for whatever reason, the rotor is louder here than what I've seen or heard from other 9015s. So if you do have some noise sensitivity issues, you're kind of OCD about that, this one's probably not for you. So the bottom line with this one is that the Helica is a great, well-made watch that's ready for most things most of the time, and one that has a really great price. And it may be debatable on whether or not this really classifies as a Gada watch. But it's also a watch that's everything great about Zelos these days, where they have well-built watches, interesting designs that go their own way, and all wrapped up in a great price. But it is a bit different, and you're not going to get away from that. It's not your everyday clean classic Gada watch that most think of. And while for some that's a positive, I'm one of them, it's not going to be for everyone. And I think this may be one for someone who wants more of a dress watch that can fill in for a casual watch. One that's a little bit tougher and more durable as well. And that's kind of the opposite of most Gada watches. So again, great watch. If you like the look and you like the idea of it, I'd recommend it. And I can see this being a hit among the Zelos faithful. But if you're sort of on the fence, I think you got plenty of time to think about it. Because unlike a lot of the Zelos watches of the past, I don't really see this one selling out real quick. Just because it is a little bit different, and in some ways, Zelos is a little late to the Gada party. There were a lot of great Gada watches released last year, and a lot of people bought at least one. I mean, in my top 10 for last year, the top two were Gada watches. But we'll have to see how well it does. Now, in the meantime, let me know what you guys think about this watch down below and how you think it compares to your go anywhere watch of choice. And as always, you guys know what to do down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm Shane, this is Roth of Time, and I'll see you next time.